Hello and welcome to the Ripple of History Book Club. For today's reading, I will be doing The Forgotten Voices of World War II. They've been forgotten no longer. They shall be heard. Okay, so this is from the Sound Archive. The most important of its kind in the world. Holds a vast quantity of interviews with soldiers, sailors, airmen and civilians recorded over the last 30 years. After months of detailed research and having listened to hundreds of hours of interviews, he has pulled together the story of the war through these powerful and moving testimonies. He, of course, being Max Arthur. Right. Today we're starting in 1939. The outbreak of the war. Just showing off my my bookmark there. Tits out. Stick him over there. The day the war was declared, the Admiral called us together in the war room and gave us champagne and gave us a toast. Damnation to Hitler. No one wanted to admit that another European conflict was inevitable. The horror of the last war was such that, to some, almost any compromise would be acceptable to avoid conflict again. In 1938, however, Hitler's foreign policy became more aggressive and he made plans to annex parts of Czechoslovakia. The British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain flew to Germany to discuss Czechoslovakia with the German, French and Italian leaders and returned having agreed to cede the disputed Sudetenland area to Germany with a promise of peace in our time. Wafting it around. However, as 1939 dawned, the Allies began to prepare for war in earnest. Hitler continued his steady drive to take over Europe, unperturbed by any signed agreements, and his troops invaded Czechoslovakia in March. By mid-May, Hitler had joined with Italy in the Pact of Steel and revoked the non-aggression pact with Poland. Reaching an agreement with Stalin in August as to how they would partition Poland, the Polish army mobilised as Hitler sent a force of some 750,000 men into Poland on 1st of September. Britain and France honoured their obligations to their ally and declared war on Germany on the 3rd of September. Britain's army at the outbreak of war had been boosted by the introduction of conscription for the first time during peace, but it was still an undermanned, under-equipped British expeditionary force that sailed for France on the 9th of September. On land there was no full-scale fighting. There were naval confrontations when on the night of the 3rd of September U-30 sank the British passenger liner Athenia, and the Navy sank U-39 in the Atlantic. As 1939 drew to a close, Poland had been divided between Germany and Russia, and Soviet forces had invaded Finland. But Europe seemed to hold its breath. A strange scent of anticlimax reigned. The outbreak of war. Dun dun dun. Young men joined up, many before conscription reached them, and women too embraced a new life in the forces. Those who remembered the previous conflict, however, saw bleak times ahead. Gas had proved a deadly weapon in the trenches, and the prospect now that it could be inflicted on the civilian population. Gas masks were issued to the public, air raid sirens were tested, air raid precautions demanded that full blackout be achieved during hours of darkness, and people dug up their gardens to erect air raid shelters. After a flurry of sandbagging and bomb-proofing, there was an atmosphere of fearful anticipation. Western Europe waited for the first action and hoped favourably that the troops would be home before Christmas. Evelyn White, civilian in Birmingham. Do I do the accents?
I remember vividly peace in our time. Neville Chamberlain coming back from Munich. We thought, thank God, there's going to be peace. It's not going to be war. But of course, events proved wrong. I began thinking, is it going to be like the First World War, where thousands of men were killed? In a way, they were human fodder. I thought, is this going to be a repeat? What's going to happen to my brothers? I can't keep doing that voice. Anyway, that's the end of that quote, thank God. Muriel Tucker, civilian, aged 13 in London. I remember when the bother with Czechoslovakia.
I remember the bother with Czechoslovakia, and we thought there was going to be a war. My father certainly did. We were quite prepared for it. Then, of course, it all blew over temporarily, and I remember Dad brought us a dolly each to celebrate, because it seemed as if it was going to be all right, and of course, it wasn't. Frederick Winterbottom, Secret Intelligence Service, the SIS. We had an agreement with our man in Warsaw that he would let us know the moment hostilities started, and I think it was when the first bomb dropped on Warsaw that he got through to us at once. And I had the signal brought in to me, and I was sleeping in the office, of course, at the time. I had the pleasure of ringing up the Secretary to the Cabinet, who was sleeping at that time, and happened to be a friend of mine. I said, "I've got a job for you. War has broken. War has broken out, and I think you'd better advise the Cabinet." I won't repeat his language at the other end, because he didn't get another wink of sleep that night. But we were now at war. Chamberlain talked about the subject on the radio a few days later. Dorothy Williams, teenager at the outbreak of war. It was a very anxious time. My parents followed the events very closely, so when we knew that the war would break out, I think it was 11 o'clock in the morning, we were really keyed up. I was frightened. We didn't know what was ahead. We had relatives who had been badly gassed. Father said that if the Germans ever landed, he would kill us all rather than let us fall into their hands. That frightened us a little bit too. We didn't know what was going to be the worst of the two. Oh yes, he meant it. He had been right through the previous war and he'd seen a lot. We had to go to the hall in the village and collect our gas masks. I never found mine very comfortable. For babies, there were big gas masks in which the child lay. I know my babysitter was absolutely terrified of it. I don't know what would happen if she had remained in it for a long time. My baby sister, not babysitter, sorry. I don't know what would happen if she had remained in it for a long time because she was so frightened. She screamed the place down and went blue in the face. Of course, we had to carry them everywhere we went in those little cardboard boxes with a piece of string attached. We never moved without them. I took mine with me until I joined up. Doris Scott, civilian from Canning Town, East London. I was terrified of what would happen, since I had been through the First World War, and had to take shelter in a chapel on the corner of the street where we lived. The air power of the First World War wasn't anything like that of 1939, but those raids were frightening enough. The possibility of war was really frightening, especially with two young children. We were told that we had to go to the local town hall and receive gas masks. My baby had to be issued with a sort of diving helmet with horizontal wires, totally encasing her. My other daughter was 3 and had this Mickey Mouse gas mask which wouldn't scare her. My mother, being asthmatic, was given another contraption which was right for her breathing. I had the normal mask that everyone else did. So we had 4 different types of gas masks in one family. Picture there. War. War kicks off. The dreaded gas masks. Ronald McGill, evacuee from Vauxhall, South London, 9 at the outbreak of the war. The week prior to the outbreak of the war, everybody seemed to know what was going to happen, and my parents were worried. They thought that our part of London would be devastated by bombs, the first moment that the war was declared. Although now we know it's ridiculous when you look back, it wasn't. These people round there that lived in the Vauxhall area, they weren't too well educated. The parents, the children were gradually getting better than the parents, who were very working class. They had a very real fear. My mother had seen the Zeppelins come down over Elstree in the First World War, and she thought that was going to happen again. I heard her telling another lady that if Germany did attack, she would rather kill her own children than let them be taken. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't imagine Germans in my house. It didn't make any sense. They issued gas masks in Walworth Road before the outbreak of the war, and that was the last straw. They thought about gas, and that frightened all the average working class ladies. It was a fear which was generated by our own air raid precautions, if you like. Jutta Buda, a Jewish girl living in Germany. We were on vacation in September 1939, and we were playing on the beach. and our parents came running down to the beach and told us war had broken out and that we had to go home immediately. I thought it was very exciting, even though I didn't want to leave the beach, and we all pushed into trains and everybody had to go home. Mysterious things were beginning to happen. We lived in a duplex, and the radio used to be on the wall facing us, and my parents moved the radio to an inside wall of the house and away from our neighbours, and they would keep it very low because they were listening to foreign stations, which was of course forbidden. Sometimes my mother listened from under a blanket so that nobody could hear her outside, and we were told not to talk about that outside the house. Edward Doe, former soldier who had fought in the Spanish Civil War. Looking round, I could see that we were quite unprepared to enter a war of any magnitude. We just weren't ready. We never had the kit, and we never had the men. We never had anything. We had so far lagged behind. Us chaps who had been in the services were under no illusion as to what the word war itself meant. We had no illusions on that score. However, I answered the call the same as many thousands of others and reported myself at Winchester. And we were there a total of 2 days. Everything was in chaos because the barracks were not only housed in the King's Royal Rifle Corps, it also housed the Rifle Brigade and also the Hampshire Regiment. You can imagine the chaos as literally hundreds and hundreds were pouring through the gates those first 3 days. All reserves, answering the call. Lieutenant Dick Caldwell, Lieutenant Surgeon, Royal Navy. As war approached, I think the thought of going to war was exciting. The day war was declared, the Admiral called us together. This is the quote from the first page. The Admiral called us together to the war room and gave us champagne and gave us a toast. Damnation to Hitler. Yeah, and damnation to him. Damn right. Pilot officer. Sorry. Pilot officer Douglas Grice, 32 Squadron, RAF. On September the 3rd, 1939, I seem to remember listening to the wireless, as it was called, hearing the announcement that we were at war with the Germans, and there was I. And there was, a suppressed cheer. The thought that at long last we would earn our keep was really quite exhilarating. We didn't know quite what was going to follow, but at the time we were fully trained, well, as trained as we could have been for fighting. We didn't know then that our tactics were all wrong, but anyways, we could fly our airplanes rather well. Our tactics had never been tested in warfare, unlike the Germans who had had the Spanish War to practice in. We had a set series of attacks. They were number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. And there were various manoeuvres you had to go through, like going from flying in Vic formation to flying in line astern. Attacking bombers from above, behind, the side, none of which was the slightest bit of use when you came to the point of actually finding the enemy and wanting to fire your gun. Lady Anne Chichester, civilian voluntary worker in Hampshire. Although the war hadn't reached England, it had very much reached the continent, and 2 or 3 days before war broke out, 46 children arrived from Portsmouth with some of their teachers. They came in buses from Bewley Road station, and the Red Cross detachment all greeted them in the village and in the W1 hut. We had tea for them and gave them buns and biscuits before we sorted out which house they should go to. Each of them was given a bag of rations. The sad thing was that whoever had organised the departure of the children from Portsmouth had forgotten to tell the children to bring knives and forks and spoons, so we all had to rush around and borrow from everybody. On that fateful day of Sunday the 3rd of September, at 11 in the morning, we all sat around the radio and we heard Neville Chamberlain's speech, with the horrific news that we were actually, from that moment, at war with Germany. Everybody was extremely shattered. By an extraordinary coincidence, within 10 minutes of the announcement, all the sirens went off, and we really did think that was the very moment that the bombers were about to arrive. But it was only a false alarm, and the all clear went. But it was a very strange time. We really thought that we were going to be bombed. By about 6 o'clock in the evening, King George VI spoke to the nation. It was a very amazing time to live through. We spent most of the day just talking about the horror of it all and trying to plan what we could to do in the immediate future to get all the organisations moving that we have been planning for some time. Lady Isabel Napier, civilian living in London. We had a butler, 4 staff I think, but the moment of course that the war broke out, everything dissolved around me. The butler went off to join up, the cook left, she was frightened she might be bombed. The nursery governess left to help evacuate the LCC children, the London children. All the kids were evacuated as quickly as possible, and anyone living in the country with a spare room was liable to have these evacuees sent to them. And some of them of course had never seen the country, never seen the sea or farm animals and all the rest of it. I don't think really it was a great success. Sorry, I've got a very dry cough. Ronald McGill, evacuee from Vauxhall, South London. I'd been convalescent in 1938. I could see more country as far as I was concerned. Bigger and bigger Vauxhall parks. For children it was extremely exciting. I don't think that this had ever come over enough. It was a great adventure, but when it came to the moment when we lined up and your mum and dad were on one side of the road and you were on the other, then we all just burst into tears, the lot of us. The teachers told their own classes they were going, and we were all told to be packed and to have our little bags. We were given a list, and we had to give our mother and father, which they had to return within 2 days. So they knew the children were prepared. The ones they didn't get back from them when they were visiting in the evenings to make sure what was happening and why. Because a lot of the mothers were working class and weren't going to let their children go. They were going to refuse. If their children were going to die, they were going to die with them. My mother was one of those. She didn't want us to go. It was only our father who made us go. My family was completely split, and there were terrible rows over it. In our area, there were no children who didn't go. The teachers literally forced them. The fact that some were back within a week was immaterial, but they did make everyone go at first. Some parents were moving away anyway. There was a voluntary evacuation as well. Some were leaving and going to relatives. Everybody knew that our part of London, near Waterloo, was going to be an immediate target. There was help for those who couldn't get together their things. Hygiene things were got for them. Soap, flannels, toothbrushes were got, but nothing else. Some just walked along there with just a paper bag and everything they had in it. I had a model Bren gun carrier, which I wasn't going to lose. My sister took a doll with her. We were allowed to small things which we carried in our bag. All we were told was we were going to the countryside. In the week prior to going, we did things like drawing cows. How much we knew about trees. We were geared up for the countryside. Some little children have never been to the country, never seen cattle. We were told we would be following the Thames, and that was it. All the boys had loved fishing, which at the time was just the ponds of Clapham Common. And suddenly they were transported and couldn't wait to enjoy the Thames life. Be all over by Christmas, some were saying, but the teacher said, "You allow for a year." I've no idea how we were supposed to manage for a year with a toothbrush and one change of socks. Silly asses. Who we got? Doris Scott, civilian from Canning Town, East London. I thought it was awfully funny, although I suppose I shouldn't say that in the war. But when the warning went, there was a chappie who lived at the end of the street. He was under the impression that as soon as the warning went, that he had to put his gas mask on. He did this over and over again, running through the street with it on. We had been told to only use the gas mask if we heard rattles, and that the normal warning was for getting into your shelter. It was very funny. Ronald McGill. We've already had Ronald McGill. Ronald's back. The evacuee from Vauxhall. We waved goodbye. The parents stayed on one side of the road, and they all cried their eyes out. It was terrible. But we were all happy and joking by then. We'd had our apple, bagged our gas mask, and we said our goodbyes. We got into Vauxhall Station, and it was like entering a tomb. All tiled and dark. We had to wait down there until the train came in. It was a Southern Railway train, and that went round the loop line to Reading. It was really packed. What I remember is the noise. 10 carriages of children, and half of them were hanging out the windows. A lot of police there. It was just bedlam. I felt the teachers were very, very harassed, and in retrospect they did a marvellous job. They shepherded us all in there, looked after us, and they were worried themselves. Some of their own children were with us. Mum said that after we left it was like a cathedral. It was so quiet. The whole area. In the evening, she said, it was unbelievable. They didn't realise till then the noise of the children playing. The streets had been our playgrounds. On the train we were all happy, thrilled, adventurous. We whizzed under funny old archways at Clapham Junction and Wandsworth Town. We could see people lined up above it all, waving to us. That cheered us up no end. We were joyful for them. We went through Richmond, across the Thames, and you knew you were in the countryside then. It wasn't long before we saw the cows, and we were thrilled. It was a tremendous adventure for all of us. When we got to Reading, we were taken into a big hall. People came in and sat at the desks, and then they walked down the line and tried to take the pairs and families. I was taken by a local council man. The house was super. We went by car. I just couldn't believe it. My sister and I were just earmarked. We wanted a boy and a girl. You'll do. We were handed over to a maid. We hardly saw the husband and wife that took us. We had 2 small beds. I remember crying a lot at first. We used to sob and sob and sob. I was 9 and she was 7. We were probably spent an hour crying. After that, we'd eat an apple or read something and go to bed. Teachers came around occasionally to see us in the evening, but we were very cut off. Joan Reed, schoolgoing Woodford, Essex. Evacuated to Nearonga. I don't recall anything apart from the blackout and having these black curtains and these windows with sticky tape in case they got shattered. Some houses had boards that you put up completely to block out the light. To completely block out the light. I remember a warden shouting, "Put out that light!" You heard that quite often because they patrolled the streets. And the food shortages, my sister didn't know what a banana was until a year after the war, and oranges were kept for pregnant women and small children under 5. I don't remember my mother saying, "This is it, you're going." We were in the playground and my younger sister was crying. Lots of little children were crying. This was mainly because mothers were left outside the gate and we were ushered into the school. We all walked to the station with our gas masks round our neck in a long crocodile from Leytonstone High Road. When we arrived at Ongar Station, we walked into the local school hall where we stood around, and in the centre were the prospective foster mothers, but they walked around us as if we were cattle. John Brazier, evacuee from Hastings, that's near us, aged 8 at the outbreak of the war. We ate our sandwiches, laughed and joked. Having left at 9 that morning, we arrived at 5 or 6 o'clock. We were pretty tired. We were then taken to the local school, and it was upsetting because it was near the end before anyone claimed us. Sylvia Taylor, evacuee from Hook, Surrey to Leeds, aged 4 at the outbreak of the war. We arrived and were introduced. We were very, very shy. Then they said tea was ready, and we were taken into the dining room, and there was a table groaning with food. Our eyes nearly popped out of our heads. We'd never seen so much food. Gwendolyn Stewart. I was wondering what this word was, but it's Ashby de la Zouche. I know Ashby de la Zouche. Schoolgirl evacuated from Birmingham to Ashby de la Zouche. Helen started to cry when she saw my mother and asked, "Mum, why can't we come home?" My mother asked if she could speak privately to her children, and she was shown into another room. I said, "Mum, we can't sit down to eat. We have to stand at the table. They don't give us chairs." and we have to eat sardines. We just don't like sardines." Jack said, "Look, Mum," and took down his little trousers and showed his bottom, which was red and raw. Helen said, "And me." They had been so hungry that they had broken into the food larder and opened a jar of strawberry jam and taken it to bed with them. And the father had found out and whipped them. My mother was incensed at the injustice of this. We were just being used for this extra money coming into the house. Whip them, take our jam. Damn little kids. Henry Middleman, German youth apprenticed to the railway. Germany had invaded Poland, and to us it was something great. With shame I express this feeling now, because I had no idea what it really meant to the people there, to be invaded by a foreign army. And anyway, to be honest, I didn't care. I saw it as German greatness, and I thought, well, anyway, the Poles are second rate, and they have treated our German people living there very badly. It serves them right. And also, to think that Germany now could occupy Poland, then surely we would be a powerful state in Central Europe. That appealed to me. People in general did not like it, because many of the neighbours, they remember the First World War. My father had been a soldier. He said, "I remember at first it was all great, the colours and all this, and fighting for the Kaiser and the Empire. But then later on, things turned and changed. And it could very well happen again, because it could be a long war. The Blitzkrieg was a great idea. With our superior technology in warfare, we would smash the little lot. Yet, within a few days, France and England came in. We made a point of it, that it was not Germany who had declared war on England or France, but it was the ultimatum they sent to us, saying, if you are not out of Poland, and by so-and-so, we consider ourselves to be at war with you. That was a strong propaganda line. We have not declared war on the Western democracies, they have declared war on us. And they should have kept us out of our arrangement we had with the Poles. That was our business. I thought a war was a great thing. We were being told it cleanses the nation, and a war is necessary in order to get the rubbishy element out of our blood. And I believed it. Francis Codd, civilian working in London for a printer. I had foreseen that with Hitler's advance across Europe and his latest move that the war was both inevitable and necessary. That evening of the invasion, I was too numbed with tiredness and sadness, really, to feel much except misery that all my past life would be changed from now on. And funny enough, it wasn't till that Saturday morning that I got up in my flat, that I got up in my own flat, that I felt an intolerable weight of sadness. I worked all my life in the family printing business in the city, within 2 minutes' walk of the Bank of England. At that time I was 30 years old, and I'd had a very pleasant bachelor life, and now I felt it was coming to an end. Mike Sherwood, apprentice in the Merchant Navy. On our way to Australia, war was declared. I remember being on the bridge with the second officer, called Ring. He always had a bit of a sardonistic twist to him. He said, "Well, Sherwood, this will be something for you to write about. It's war. This will be something for you to write home about. It's war." I wondered what the hell he was talking about. To me, war was being declared meant nothing. When we reached Australia, we had to go and be fitted with a 6-inch gun. The gun's crew was made up from us apprentices and various members of the crew. We had to go over to the naval base at Rushcutters Bay and learn all about guns. When the time came for us to sail, they put on board a DEMS, defensively equipped merchant ship. Gunner. They put on board a DEMS gunner, a Royal Navy fellow to look after the gun and see that we knew what we were doing. We stemmed out to give this gun a trial. Out through Sydney Harbour. I was the sight setter. I used to stand at the side of the gun and say, "Range so-and-so." We loaded it up and the gunner said, "Fire!" And there was such a clatter. I was knocked flat to the ground. Everyone else was flat around me. There was a great roar and commotion from below in the deckhouse where all the stewards and cooks live because nobody had told them we were firing, and all the bunks said everything fell down. We didn't feel we were at war. Sub-Lieutenant John Roxworth. Or is it Lieutenant? Are we Lieutenant or Lieutenant? I can never remember. Come August 1939, it was obvious the war was coming. Convoys for merchant shipping had already started. At 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, 3rd of September, we were at war. Our depth charges were primed and we were ready to go. A quarter of an hour after the war had been declared, we found a submarine Echo which we attacked and dropped 11 charges. We were never credited with a submarine, and I should think it was quite likely a shoal of fish or a rock, but it really got one's mind racing. There was I, a young chap of 20, actually dropping things to kill people. It was quite exciting. Gunther Rahl, the legendary Gunther Rahl, Luftwaffe pilots, fighter pilots actually. There was a big depressed mood throughout the country. What is going on? But as a fighter pilot, I also felt if there is a war, then I want to be successful and be a fighter pilot and do my duty. But the population as such was very much shocked by the war, there's no doubt. And he went on to be a very, very good pilot. Ordinary seaman Douglas Stevens, signaller aboard HMS Saon. I was called up by the RMVR people. People seem to cheer you on all your way and wish you all the best. People at the bus stop, when I caught the bus to the embankment with my kit bag, people seemed to want to pat you on the back as you went. Midshipman Ian McIntosh. Gotta say Macintosh. Aboard HMS Sussex. I'm guessing he's Scottish, so we'd when war was declared, we'd had a bit of patrolling off the Spanish coast during the Civil War on the Mediterranean side. Then around June, the whole fleet moved to Alexandria. We were, in fact, in Alexandria when the war was declared. One of the preparations for war, apart from fusing all the shells, was to sharpen the cutlasses for the boarding party, as this was likely to be led by a midshipman. The idea of sailors behind you with sharp cutlasses wasn't a very, very cheerful thought. Gwendolyn Saunders, civilian in Weymouth. On Monday, I went back to the library. There was a fair stir about it, and by the end of the week, this other girl had already been scouting around, apparently, to find out what she could do. She'd been up to this Air Force station. She said, it's rather exciting. I think I shall like this. I've signed for a plotter. So I said, what is that? Well, she said, I think we shall plot the operations, but I'll have to go for training. I had to sign a form. It was either for the duration or for 4 years, so I said, what did you do? She said, I signed for the duration. It can't go on longer than 4 years, can it? Aircraft woman Elsie Bartlett, an early recruit to the WAF. God bless their old WAF. God bless them. All types turned up at Hallam Street to enlist. Short, fat, thin, small, dowdy, glamorous, typists and shop girls, married and single, from all walks of life. They were fussy about who they took at the beginning, and I hadn't had a lot of going for me. What with the spinal curvature and bad eyes. Say it as it is, love. However, I slipped in as a grade C3, and by that evening was in Harrogate with the King's Shilling and a sore arm from injections. When I got my posting, I opened it and read RAF Dunkirk. Well, I nearly had a heart failure. My God, I thought, things must be dodgy. My Dunkirk turned out to be a village in Kent. So there I was, a small waff, weighed down in a heavy grey coat, hat pulled down tight, carrying a gas mask and a tin hat, a case, a kit bag almost as big as me, and clutching orders and a packet of sandwiches. Off I staggered to Kent. God bless you, love. Ordinary seaman Vernon Coles, stoker, 2nd class, Royal Navy, aboard HMS Faulkner. I saw my first real action on the 14th of September. We were exercising with Ark Royal. Yeah, the good old Ark Royal. Helped take down the Bismarck, we know that. And 3 destroyers off St Kilda. Suddenly, during the mid-afternoon, there were 2 terrific explosions. We went to action stations immediately. We learned that a German U-boat had fired 2 torpedoes at Ark Royal. Their torpedoes had magnetic heads on. So when they came within the magnetic field of Ark Royal, they both exploded. Otherwise she would have been hit. We sailed straight down the torpedo tracks, dropped a full pattern of depth charges, and up she came. It was U-39. We took them all prisoner. We rescued the men in the whalers and then brought them aboard. They were badly shaken, as anybody would have been on the receiving end of a couple of depth charges. I talked to some of the German prisoners. They thought they were going to be shot, and they were actually surprised at the way that they were treated. We had to communicate with them in sign language, but we gave them cigarettes and things. They were rather wet, so they were supplied with blankets, while all their clothes and underwear were taken down to the boiler room to dry off. Their vests had all the German swastikas on, so off they came during the night. They were taken as souvenirs. The Germans were most upset about that. We offloaded them in Scapa Flow. That was the first U-boat of the war to go down, and they were the first naval prisoners of the war. Yeah, that's it. All boys. The Royal Navy, the senior service, always there. Ordinary seaman Stanley Allen, recruit, Royal Navy. I went up to Skegness with a small suitcase, taking what I was told to take, which was very little. Met other people at the railway station on the way up. And when we got to Skegness, we came out and it was raining. A little man in a blue Burberry and a badge on his cap. A man in a blue Burberry and a badge on his cap, who I later found was a petty officer, he said, "Here, you long bastard. I was the tallest one amongst them. You come and stand here." I was brought up in a church home, and of course he must have seen my face, and he said, "Oh, don't take any notice, Lofty. If we call you a bastard, we love you." And of course, as I was the tallest, he was putting me right as the right-hand man from which the others could fall in. Bastards. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Stanier, 1st Battalion Welsh Guards. I think we rather thought that it would be like the First World War. There'd be the rush forward by the Germans, we'd hold them, then the trench warfare would come about as it was. We did realise that there'd be much more bombing from the air, in fact. We thought that it would be much greater than it was to start off with. Gas. So everybody had gas masks. Evelyn Fee, civilian mother. We had the blackout. All the street lamps went out, and oh, it was awful. Pitch black out there. And then we had the barrage balloons all go up overhead. Yeah, I think that was the worst part, waiting for it, you know. We heard about the evacuation from the school. I wanted to stay in London with my little ones, but we had a friend living with us who kept on at me. He said that it would be best if I did go away, because he said, once this lot starts, it's really going to start. I can remember the little girl catching hold of my coat, my little girl. She looked so beautiful. She really did. I can always remember Jean that morning, and Teddy the boy, because he was a lovely little boy too. Captain Anthony Rhodes, 253 Field Company, Royal Engineers. Yeah, the sappers. We love the sappers. Put some cones out. The old Al Murray joke with it. One of the things we were told, the sort of rumour that was going round, was that the Germans couldn't possibly have built up an army since 1933. In 6 years. People even said that when the Germans paraded their tanks through the cities of Norman Germany, some of them were made of cardboard. That is the sort of rumour one heard. Turns out they were very real. Yeah. Bugler, Edward Watson, 8th Battalion, King's Royal Rifle Corps. The boat was just going out, very leisurely out of Dover Harbour. I was still convinced that they were going to take us out and bring us back again. We were all laughing and joking. This fellow Day and another fellow, Corporal West, started flashing away with his signal lamp up to the top of the cliffs of Dover. Lights are flashing back from there to the boat. I said to Dave, "What are they doing?" He said, "He's wishing us good luck and hope you come back soon." So I said, What are you saying?" "I'm thanking him very much." I said, "We're not going, are we?" He said, "Oh yes." And that was the first time I realised. I said, But I can't. I haven't told my mum. It was all quite different then. This was the real thing. It wasn't an exercise. I went and stood at the edge of the boat and started thinking. Because it was going on. What am I going to do? I was a bugler. I had a gun with a Bren tripod. And a bugle as well. We had silver bugles. I thought to myself, what am I going to do with this bugle? Supposing they ask me to play it over there. Or blow it. There's Germans there. They'll hear me. They'll shoot me. I took the bugle off and threw it in the channel. Charles Bertie Nash. This is the final one for today. Civilian living in London. On my wedding day, which was 12th of October 1939, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I received a little buff envelope asking me, in reference to my volunteering, I should report to Acton Town Recruiting Office and get myself sworn in and attested. I must admit, I was rather shattered at receiving this on my wedding day. And we'll finish with the picture of the kids there off to the countryside. Give them an apple. Okay, so that was 1939, the day the war was declared. Coming up next is the phony war. Always remember, if you like this, please like and subscribe, or check out my other videos. They're here. Subscribe there. Video here. See you next time. Thank you.